January 9, 2022 began like any other cold winter day, until a country's digital heartbeat simply stopped. North Korea's few outward-facing web services blinked out, and global monitors erupted with outage alerts. Government sites that usually pushed propaganda went silent, as if someone had walked into a server room and pulled the main breaker. Analysts pointed to recent missile tests and muttered about state-sponsored retaliation. But the real culprit was stranger: a single anonymous operator with a personal score to settle. The question lingered: why would one hacker risk striking an entire nation, and how far would that vendetta go? 1 year earlier, an American security researcher, known only as P4X, sat in the glow of his desk lamp, scrolling through code with a half-finished mug of cold coffee beside him. Late one night in January 2021, he accepted an innocuous-looking tool from another researcher and opened it inside a locked-down virtual machine out of habit. At first, nothing happened. But the next day, Google published a stark warning. North Korean operators were weaponizing files to steal research from Western InfoSec experts. P4X checked the file again. His stomach tightened. The tool hid a backdoor, a silent doorway that would have let intruders into his environment, if not for his isolation precautions. The realization that a nation-state had targeted him personally rattled him in a way routine attacks never had. And he soon learned this wasn't an isolated incident. Pyongyang was sweeping up vulnerability research from across the security community. The hunter had become the prey. He expected U.S. government support. After all, a foreign intelligence operation against a private citizen felt like more than an insult. An FBI agent eventually called, took his statement, and then disappeared. No follow-up, no assistance, no retaliation. Weeks blurred into months. The silence felt like abandonment. Left alone, frustration calcified into conviction. If the institutions designed to protect him wouldn't act, he would protect himself. That quiet thought grew into anger, and anger into a plan. If the state wouldn't punish those who targeted him, maybe he should. By late 2021, what began as bitterness solidified into a bold idea. He would strike North Korea's sliver of the global internet himself. Few outsiders understand the fragile architecture of North Korea's online presence. But as P4X dug in, he found a landscape held together by brittle scaffolding, outdated software, minimal segmentation, and lax administration. To an intruder, it looked less like a fortress and more like an abandoned building with the windows left open. Night after night, he cataloged servers, fingerprinted services, and tested endpoints like a locksmith probing for loose hinges. What he found astonished him. Old Apache installs, neglected Nginx versions with well-known crash bugs, administrative panels accessible through default credentials, and routers that would choke under modest load. It was an embarrassment of unpatched doors. Automation was the only way one person could pressure an entire nation's perimeter. He built scripts to scan ranges, identify live hosts, and deploy targeted payloads to crash or overwhelm services. Denial of service effects through old software faults and buffer handling issues. He layered anonymity, used rented cloud instances, and hid behind the handle P4X, pronounced PAX, a wry nod toward his idea of enforced peace. He knew the risks. The CFAA carries no exceptions for vigilantes, and North Korea is not known to forgive intrusions. But anger and a sense of betrayal began to outweigh fear. In early January 2022, after rehearsing every step, he sat in his dim apartment, t-shirt, pajama pants, cold air humming from a vent, and initiated the assault. Packets streamed toward a handful of IP ranges representing nearly all of North Korea's outward-facing systems. At first, it felt anticlimactic. Code running is rarely cinematic. He cued a foreign film, ate chips, and checked the monitor in quiet intervals. Then the responses began to fail. A travel portal stopped answering pings. A state news site timed out. Another page refused connections entirely. A third-party uptime monitor painted the scene in unmistakable red. Independent observers later described a mysterious wave of traffic tearing through entire networks. And for a moment, P4X felt a disorienting triumph. He had done what most assumed only a state actor could achieve. But as he watched the world guess at the culprit, celebration mixed with calculation. This had only been the opening move. The blackout raised questions he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. Newsrooms and intelligence circles spun with theories. Maybe U.S. Cyber Command, maybe Allied retaliation for missile tests. No one imagined a lone operator in slippers. Inside North Korea, the outage embarrassed the regime more than its citizens, who lacked global internet access. Analysts noticed the pattern, sites flickering on, then collapsing again, and the mystery deepened. Meanwhile, P4X watched the misdirection unfold. Anonymity wasn't just protection, it was leverage. He didn't want credit, he wanted impact without exposure. But cracks emerged. A few cyber colleagues warned that his unilateral actions might interfere with classified intelligence operations inside those same networks. Chaotic traffic can blind surveillance or disrupt quiet infiltrations. They cautioned him too about legality. Hacking is hacking in the eyes of the law. He pressed forward anyway. Shutting down propaganda sites was symbolic but not transformative. He wanted something with more weight. Documents, logs, and evidence that would expose Pyongyang's cyber campaigns. To scale beyond outages, he needed more hands. He created a hidden darknet page, the Funk Project, short for FU North Korea, a rally point for volunteers. The message was simple. If one person could shut down a nation's perimeter, a loose network could go further. As collaborators grew, so did the risk of mission drift. Still, the opportunity to expose wrongdoing was intoxicating. With a small, trusted core, P4X escalated from outages to surgical intrusions, misconfigured mail servers, backup files left on public FTPs, web UI bugs ripe for light implants. He found his openings. He focused on collecting non-humanitarian material, propaganda assets, technical logs, and proof of North Korea's operations against researchers. But operational reality rarely behaves. A misjudged leak revealed the identity of a mid-level contractor unknowingly tied to relevant infrastructure. That contractor and his family received threats, an outcome P4X had vowed to avoid. The mistake forced a reckoning. Internal fractures widened. Some participants urged safer, whistleblower-style disclosure. Others wanted escalation regardless of collateral. Meanwhile, intelligence services quietly monitored the fallout, worried that amateur operations could compromise valuable covert access. Yet the public evidence was undeniable. Logs, cached files, and documents confirming North Korea's espionage. Pressure mounted on governments to respond. But success attracted attention, from sympathetic journalists and hostile actors alike. Anonymous bragging risked breadcrumbs. Operational security tightened, but OPSEC failures are often microscopic. North Korea didn't sit idle either. Technicians patched systems, hardened public services, and combed logs for intrusion traces. Countermeasures followed. As leaks piled up and the Funk Project wavered between principled exposure and reckless intrusion, one question sharpened. How long before someone traced a path back to him? The leaks eventually formed a body of evidence too substantial to dismiss. Concrete proof of Pyongyang's campaign surfaced publicly, shifting the narrative from outage speculation to verified documentation. The spotlight widened. With attention came scrutiny. Cloud providers received subpoenas. Investigators correlated hosting patterns and timing signatures. A small operational slip, barely noticeable, became a lead. Law enforcement began closing in. Meanwhile, North Korean services scrambled to recover. Internal investigators scoured logs. Countermeasures struck back at suspected intruders. And the consequences of earlier missteps grew heavier. One leak had unintentionally exposed a contractor's identity. Threats followed. Exactly the harm P4X promised himself he'd avoid. It hardened him, but also haunted him. In the blurred lines of cyber conflict, people, not just systems, get hit. The internal rifts in Funk Project grew wider. Some wanted controlled transparency. Others pushed for escalation regardless of fallout. Operational and ethical tension fused with legal danger. Allied intelligence agencies were irritated too. Vigilante campaigns can scorch assets, disrupt surveillance, or force premature shutdowns of sensitive operations. And governments do not welcome citizens conducting unilateral foreign offensives. Yet the leaks also forced a difficult question into public view. Are nations doing enough to protect private researchers targeted by authoritarian states? As debate surged, forums lighting up, analysts arguing ethics, P4X kept a low profile. But silence is not permanent armor. Digital artifacts accumulate. Adversaries are patient. When investigators seized logs from one of the cloud providers he used, the clock started ticking. Hosting metadata and timing correlations formed a narrow path toward identification. The net tightened. He dismantled servers, purged data, rotated identities, and shut down accounts. But perfect OPSEC is a myth. Even seasoned practitioners make mistakes. Faced with possible exposure, prosecution, or foreign retaliation, he made neither confession nor spectacle. He withdrew quietly. The Funk project faded. The noise died down. In the aftermath, policy circles debated private offensive action, researcher protection, and the line between activism and vigilantism. The leaks forced institutions to confront their own lapses and their reliance on individuals who often stand alone against state-sponsored threats. For P4X, the victory was bittersweet. He had shown that a single person could embarrass a sovereign regime's online posture, but also that unilateral action spirals unpredictably. He stayed in the shadows, watching the ripples he started shift public discussions across governments and the security world. No parade, no hero monologue, just the quiet aftertaste of exposing systemic negligence and provoking uncomfortable truths. A final question lingers. One man brought a regime's outward internet to its knees for a moment. But what happens when thousands of criminals weaponize stolen identities at scale? When the threat isn't a vigilante but an economy?